And finally, without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Jan and Jeff. They will share a little bit more about themselves and their background and kind of take things away. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kim. Appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. If you don't know the Rhythm of Business, we are a professional services firm that focuses on alliance management, strategic alliances, and business collaboration. We've been part of AFAP since 2001, 2002, and we're very pleased to be with you today as we share with you our webinar, The Impact on Alliance Results from Overlooked Fundamentals, Finding the Hidden Gold. I'm going to kick us off and then Jeff will take over. We've got a couple of opportunities for you to interact with us, and certainly we will take questions at the end of the presentation. So we're going to focus on alliance operating models today. That's the day-to-day of how alliances work. And we're doing that because there's a very direct relationship between how effective they are and the outcomes that you get. And we're going to look at three aspects of it: getting alignment on operating processes, onboarding practices, and communication practices. And we're going to share with you some data that comes from our work over the past 3 years in looking at primarily co-development and co-commercialization alliances. We have 3 different frameworks that we use to evaluate alliances and the functions that are helping them achieve their intended value. And what the data that we're going to share with you comes from either our Vital Signs Alliance Operations Effectiveness Assessment, or the Foundation Model, where we look at the structure and operation of an alliance management practice, or when we evaluate what people are actually doing from the standpoint of what we've identified as 7 habits of highly effective alliance professionals. So Jeff, why don't you take us through some of the ways in which we organize our alliances?
Sure. One of the perennial questions we get is, what's the best way to organize our alliance function in the organization? And while there are myriad answers to that question, depending on the context and what's going on and the nature of the alliances you have, we see as kind of the 2 ends of a continuum. One, the Noah's Ark model, two by two. Paired model has similar functions from each company, and they divide the work to produce joint deliverables. The other end of the continuum really is a divide and conquer. It's a distributed model. Trust is a key factor in it, where each partner has specific responsibilities and specific deliverables that have been agreed upon overall, and they have to produce on their own. So we see, without going into the nitty-gritties of the pros and the cons, there's always a question of coming up with the model and then being able to keep it live, so you're able to iterate as it makes sense. You always want to have in place the proper way the best way to organize the work throughout the life cycle of an alliance. One of the things, Jan, if you go ahead. One of the things that are really critical, Jan was talking about the operating model, but I want us to just step back a little broader at first and take a look at, on the left side, you see what we call the alliance business model. And the business model has a specific intention. You want to create value, you want to deliver the value, and the recipients of the delivery need to be able to capture it. And within it, we see 3 elements: an economic model based on the give and get of dollars, yen, currencies, whatever it might be. And then we get down really to the operating model, the operating framework, and the governance process. But as we know, at the end of the day, to make any of this work, you have to have collaboration throughout this process. So again, the operating model is created when tied together with the desired collaboration between the governance and operating framework. So this is kind of a way of thinking about your alliance business model, and within that, the operating model. We've come up with, over the years, we see 4 basic design principles really for effective operating models. When Jan mentioned earlier, we have the 7 habits of successful alliance professionals. We do a lot of analysis based on the tools that we use that Jan briefly outlined, and really trying to understand what is really effective, what's really the right way from, generally more often producing the results you seek. And we see 4 elements in this. One is no gaps or overlaps. You want to define the work to be done and the skills and the FTEs, understanding the people. You don't want to have gaps. We don't have enough people, we're not attending to everything we need to, or we have so many people, we really have overlap and it's really a waste of resources. Key is to leverage the strengths. What do you bring to the relationship? What do your partners bring to the relationship? And you want to you selected them as a partner, or they selected you as a partner, so that you would contribute really expertise that you have and really want to be able to leverage those strengths. And that will help you then figure out the business model, divide and conquer, or 2 by 2. In there, then you want to define the processes. And you have to, one of the challenges is you want to come up with a process or processes for the alliance. By the same token, though, they have to work, that process you're using has to be acceptable to your company. So the interface with internal governance, it has to work. If there's a problem with internally having a problem with what's been decided for the alliance, that has to be addressed. And it also has to work for the partner. So it's really critical. And you want to establish the workflow, and you want to really build those processes. At the end of the day, the mindset is really critical. You need a one-team perspective. You really want to operate it. We like to call it Alliance Inc. Alliance Inc. You think about it as an entity. The North Star. The North Star really is a measure of goodness. As you go along and you're confronted with decisions that are always kind of challenging and for which there are many options at any point in time, what you really want to think about, though, is look at that North Star. How does each of the options in making decisions work in relation to that North Star? Which one gets us to that North Star? So it's a mindset of we, not us and them. And it's really critical that people really think about the we. It's not just about us, it's the we. And putting those together, that's the basis for really having an effective operating model. But you as an alliance professional play a major role in making all this happen. The alliance managers provide great value when they proactively help their governance and project/working teams design effective operating models that bridge the differences between the parties. Now, this seems so obvious, but collaboration, working together is, conceptually it seems simple. Operationally, it's extremely challenging. So making these things work effectively is obviously what goodness is about. Jan, now if you would take us a look at some of the outcomes by looking at different levels of operating model effectiveness.
Sure, Jeff, thank you. So here's a slide that let me take a moment to orient you to. This is what we mentioned in terms of some of the data that we're able to share. And it does tell us that the more effective operating models result in better outcomes. So on any of our assessments, what we're doing is we're asking people to agree with statements that reflect what goodness is, conditions or behaviors that you want to see to ensure that you have an effective alliance or an effectively working alliance management function. And we take the results of those assessments and we group them into 3 categories. One of them is what we call leading alliances. And those are the alliances that meet a benchmark that we've established over the year of 70% agreement on whatever assessment it is that we are implementing. The second category are what we call developing alliances. And these are those that score just a little bit under the benchmark, between 60 and 69% agreement with what we're asking about in the assessment. And then we have what we call the emerging category, those that score less than 60%. So we group them into these three categories based on their overall response to the assessment. And then we can pull out pieces of the assessment and compare that to what we get for results. And when we look at operating models, what we've done is we have pulled out the components of the assessment that deal with alignment on alliance process, team empowerment, communication protocols, and onboarding practices. And what we find when we look at those components compared to two measures of outcomes, alliance results, are you achieving your goals? Are you accomplishing what you intended? And team enthusiasm, is the team excited to be working on this? Are they happy to be working with the partner? What you can see is that there's better than a 40% improvement between the emerging category and the leading category. So what that says is that when you have a more effective alliance operating model, then you are able to really realize better outcomes in terms of the actual alliance results and your team enthusiasm. And we look at that because we find that when people score low on this question, those are teams that are marked by a high amount of turnover, which is detrimental because there's always the knowledge share, there's always some lost time. Or what also happens sometimes is that people will sub-optimize decisions. They just want to get through it. They want to get on to the next thing. So it's an important outcome that we see in driving effective alliances. So the data says more effective operating model, you're going to have better results. And these operating models, when they're not effective, they really can take a toll on people. These are some actual quotes from assessment. So people are saying we need to reduce the amount of firefighting. I'm spending 30% of my time on this alliance. It's way too much for what it is. We're duplicating normal workload. We have to do everything internally and externally. It's slowing process, undermining decision-making, and putting timelines at work. I spend a lot of time trying to navigate disjointed conversations with our partner. We've aligned, but then I get blindsided, right? We're losing months in order to try to get alignment with our partner. 9 months to agree on who was going to take the lead on something. I'm in meetings all the time and not getting any work. And probably the most negative comment we've ever received about an alliance, this alliance is sucking my soul out of my body on a daily basis. That is one unhappy camper for sure. So when these models are ineffective, they really can take a toll on people and on the results that you're getting. So let's take a look at some of the things that you can do to drive more effective operating models. And let's start by looking at process. And here's some data that talks about aligning on process and duplication of effort. And you can see that both our developing and our leading alliances, in both instances, they've cracked this 70% benchmark. So they're doing something right. Well, what causes duplication of effort? We see it in many ways. One is ineffectively integrating alliance operations into internal governance routines, resulting in multiple meetings for the same purpose, as was represented in one of those quotes that I just shared. And then duplication of effort also happens when the partners haven't agreed on how they will perform a task as an alliance, and they try to run each partner's process and then align on the output. We see that a lot with things like legal and medical review of promotional materials and publications and quality. So that can create duplication of effort as well. So let me ask you a question. What happens when there is duplication of effort? Why are we saying that that's a bad thing? Feel free to enter a few comments into the chat. And everybody should be able to see it, but we'll read them off. We'd love to collect some of your thoughts. Inefficiencies and redundancies. Frustration. Undermines value creation. Non-value added time spent. Yeah, all of those things. You can also be steering the ship in a different direction. Lower morale, right? If you get two people that are working on the same thing, they could be doing it in totally different ways. Inefficient operations. Excellent. It's not a good thing. Multiple results on the same thing. Exactly. Yeah. So we want to try to avoid the duplication of effort because it slows things down and it causes ineffective operations. So excellent. Okay. So we see three opportunities then to be able to minimize duplication of effort. The first is your interface with internal governance. And this is where a lot of people get hung up. A lot of alliances get hung up because they feel that they have to come to some sort of a decision in governance, but then it's got to get approved internally. And that means that people feel disempowered, that you don't have the right folks on the governance committees or on a project team. What you really need to do is you need to look at how you should interface with internal governance. How should that be ordered? And it's important that people on a team, not just on your JSC, but on the teams, understand what the internal approvals need to be and the authority that the teams have, because then you can transparently align on what the order of internal approval and alliance decisions or alignment is going to be. And you want to make sure that when there's a misalignment between key stakeholders and the alliance, that you're transparent about it. This is an area where it's great to have a conversation up front and really map out the internal governance that you're dealing with so that you can be as efficient and effective in gaining that input when you need it, but making sure that the committees and the teams have the freedom to operate and the freedom to move forward. So that's one way you can minimize duplication of effort. Another is how you handle your workflow on deliverables. This goes back to what Jeff was sharing in terms of the Noah's Ark or the divide and conquer model. What you want to do is you want to plan projects and deliverables together as a partnership, and you want to identify what does success look like. Yeah, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And then have one partner take the lead, right? If it's a big project, you might have some prearranged touch points, plan milestones, where you come together again and just make sure everything is on the right path. But you have agreed that the deliverable will be accepted if the criteria that you set up front have been met, right? So you don't care so much about how something is done. What you care about is getting the outcome. And you agree with your partner, you're not going to second guess each other. You trust each other's expertise, and you trust that the work will be produced as quality work. Now, it can take a little bit of time to get here, because at the beginning of an alliance, there's a lot of knowledge transfer that has to happen. And if one partner's been working on something for a while, they've got just a level of understanding that the other partner can't possibly have. But you want to work towards getting here so that you're giving each other freedom to operate. And then finally, there's process alignment. And here's where alliance professionals can be really helpful to their teams. If you identify up front some of the processes where you're going to have alignment between the partners, maybe not immediately, but you see that down the road, you're going to need to have agreements with third parties, or your alliance agreement didn't necessarily outline what your publicity and publications processes were going to be, or compliance or quality. You, as the alliance professional, you're probably not the one that is going to align the processes, but if you alert people to the fact that they're going to need to do it, and you convene the key stakeholders to define each party's must-haves, it's not going to be a fire drill when something comes up and you need it. And you want to map out a streamlined process flow and make sure everybody understands the way in which you're working. Sometimes what we see is that there's small sub-teams that are put together, either around publications or looking at promotional review, or looking at how do we ensure quality, and they work together, and it's accepted that the output of this committee satisfies each partner's internal review, because that's been taken into consideration as you have developed your joint process. So a few of the things that you want to make sure you align on, or else find that third way, that joint alliance way of doing it, around data sharing and use. This usually isn't spelled out well enough in your agreement, and you need to make sure that everybody has clear understanding of how information and data that one partner has generated can be made available and used by the other partner. Publicity and publications we've talked about, quality review, third-party contracting. Are you each going to contract with somebody that you're both working with, or will it be a three-way agreement? Market entry evaluation, what's the business case that has to be put together in order to say, yes, we're going to go into this particular geography? What's the process flow that it takes to get approved? And things around compliance. These are just examples of things that you might want to align around or find a third way. And remember that risk tolerance is often the driving factor in aligning operational processes. How much risk is a party willing to accept? If there's a problem and one partner would wind up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal because of it, their risk tolerance is going to be significantly lower than a smaller partner who perhaps wouldn't get the attention. So you have to pay attention to what each partner's risk tolerances are and appreciate why they are what they are. So Jeff, do you want to take us through some of the onboarding practices?
Sure, I'd love to.
Okay. And first, let's try another poll. And let's see if we can make this one work this time. So Jeff, you want to go ahead and give it to everybody?
Yeah, right. You mean just go over it because you?
Yes, we just go over
So
it.
again, you go to www.menti.com and you enter same code as before, 5229407. And what is your onboarding process? And please check all that apply. A, brief new governance committee members on the structure of an alliance in terms of the agreement that you brief them. B, review team charters with new governance committee members. C, explain the norms of the alliance. D, discuss the role of governance committee members with new members. And finally, engage project or governance sub-team leaders in a standard onboarding process for new members of their teams. Hopefully we have that and you're able to.
Let's see if we
connect.
can make this work. So just give me a second here. And yep, go here and yeah, there we go. Okay.
Now we're getting stuff.
So we've got Lots of people briefing new governance committee members on the structure of the alliance in terms of the agreement, reviewing charters, smaller number, explaining the norms of the alliance. That's good. I'm glad to see that. Discussing the role of governance committee members with new members. Good, a good number of people that are doing that. And engaging project or governance sub-team leaders in a standard onboarding process for new members of their teams. Super, this is really great, folks, because a lot of times we see that people are not doing the kind of onboarding that they should be doing with their new members. So let me go back. Okay, Jeff.
Next. Excellent. And, you know, as Jan just mentioned, we see people not doing what they should be doing. But if you look at this diagram, onboarding practices, no one's doing a really good job, quite frankly. This is actually one of the, I think it's actually the only one of a number of, you know, when we pull out particular issues, looking around where we see everybody's below 70%. Onboarding practices tend to focus on the business. The roles, the deliverables, the culture are either left for functional leaders to deliver, which they don't usually do, or they're not delivered with people left to just figure it out. And we hear a lot, well, you know, I got smart people working on this alliance, they'll figure it out. But at what cost? And one of the key measures of what an alliance professional's job is to manage the cost of time. And so what kinds of delays are created because basically it hasn't done the company hasn't done an adequate job of onboarding people. In each one of those days, the cash register is ringing. It's costing you time and it's costing you money. What happens, excuse me, if you don't onboard people successfully? Well, you wind up rehashing decisions. Someone comes on, they weren't briefed on how a decision was arrived at, to raise the question, why was that decision made? Alignment on actions, all of a sudden we're out of alignment. Not anticipating how the partners are working together. It causes churn, it causes frustration. And we hear that a lot, that people, you know, looking for opportunities to opt out of their assignments on these teams. It's absolutely critical. Interesting thing about it is the need to onboard people goes all the way up to the JSC. We usually see, most often see, the JSC members themselves aren't given a sufficient onboarding review to help them really understand where the alliance is that they now just joined. It's a critical role and it really needs more attention put on it. And the return for that investment on onboarding is really significant. And when you think about onboarding new participants in it, there are really three components of it. You got to talk about the role, the team member, the governance participant, you know, supporting contributor. What's the role you're asking someone to play or someone's been appointed to play on that alliance? And we mentioned that the norms, alliance culture, an established way of behaving to bridge the differences and collaborate effectively. It's critical. Not only do people have to be aware of the norms in their own company, they really need to appreciate the norms that have developed between their company and the partner organization. And then you get at the specific work, the role, the norms, the work, specific responsibilities and deliverables of the company, team, or committee function. So this is really the opportunity. Now, how do you build that scalable onboarding program? Well, we think it's really critical to start with your folks in HR, human resources. Have your HR folks, when they're talking to people about roles in the company they'll be playing, understand that, you know, alliances at our company, what is it? They really need to understand what role strategically our alliance is expected to play in the organization. And that's part of an orientation package with frequently, you know, asked questions and you know, recorded training. You want to make that investment in making sure that people are fully briefed before they assume the role as a member of an alliance committee or team. You want to create content. a briefing book is a wonderful idea, and books increasingly are online as opposed to the old form of a book, but briefing books as a living document. And that's where online, the beauty of online comes in, because you really can keep that thing fresh. It's used, oftentimes posted to the team collaboration site. Then you have to recruit the team. You got to bring people in. You have to make sure they have the training, that they understand the tools that are available to them, either on a team basis or on a functional basis. You want to have the functional leaders. Oftentimes, you want to train, brief the functional leaders, and that will help them brief the new members. Alliance professionals, at the end of the day, as you know, are generally too busy to be involved in briefing everybody that gets on the team. If you do a good job of briefing the functional leaders, the team leaders, and make sure that they understand it's their job to brief the people that on their teams or on their committees. The Alliance professionals should really worry about briefing the executives, really, the JSC. If you get that level, you want to provide personalized onboarding with planned follow-up for those execs, for the governance committee members. That's what you really need to focus on. And you want to make sure that you hold open forums throughout the year, perhaps on a quarterly basis, so that new people coming in are really able to, again, get really deep into understanding what it takes to be effective in one of these alliances. So Jan,
Yep.
talk about
Okay.
communication.
I will talk about communication. Thank you. So let me ask a question of you. What's your biggest communication challenge? And please use the chat to share. On an alliance, what do you see as the biggest communication challenge? We stump people, timely responses, clarity.
Equally important to convey sensitivities and pain points. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was to the onboarding.
Oh,
Having people's attention in busy environments, differences in priorities, promote information but not disclose confidential. Partners may have different priorities. Communication becomes a game of telephone, just getting people to communicate. Functional leads not distributing updates to their function. Yeah, we see that one a lot. And that can be a real challenge. So excellent. Keeping it simple. It's really funny that people always say that, there's too many emails, too many notices, there's just too much happening. But yet when people are asked if they are getting the right communications, oftentimes the answer is no. So it's really not so much about volume, it's about making sure that the right information is being communicated to the right people at the right time. And what the data says, just as in onboarding, we see that across the board, nobody is hitting that 70% benchmark, particularly when it comes to being surprised by something they should have known, right? And we all know nobody likes surprises, especially when they've just made a commitment based upon what they thought was correct information. And lots of surprises translate into churn-causing fire drills. You've all experienced that before. Is it easy to find alliance information? The portals, the SharePoints that we use are not as effective as they should be for sources of relevant information. And I know that what a lot of people find very challenging is that they have to log out of, for example, their team site to be able to log into their partner's team site, and they find it very cumbersome. There are ways around that. We do have alliances where they have managed to make it so that it can be seamless from one party's team site to another. So talk to your IT about that. That takes away a big pain point for people. Internal company communication. Interestingly, you can see that everybody's score is about the same here. They're almost at the benchmark. But oftentimes that internal communication can be as challenging as it is communicating with partners, particularly as we are working remotely, although I'm pleased to say more and more people are going back into the office, at least part-time, so that they can have those impromptu conversations and have the information flow. But what happens is you have a small company, sometimes information will flow really quickly. With a larger company that has a more complex structure, sometimes information gets caught at various points in the organization, and people just don't get the information that they need. So consistently, we see that as much as we think we have focused on communication and getting the right protocols in place, it's not as effective as it needs to be. So you have to build a framework that is really comprehensive and is holistic, so that it's happening among Alliance team members and within each partner company. And some of the protocols that we like to put in place so that you have, no surprises happening, or obviously it's not an absolute, but that you reduce the number of surprises, is you do want that regular peer-to-peer engagement. Make sure that folks on teams, on governance committees, that they do have regular communication with their peers. And you may have to put together more than one set of folks in order to map responsibilities. So here's where your stakeholder mapping comes into bear significantly. You want to agree upon the pathways, right? How do certain messages get communicated and by whom? And certainly you don't want the Alliance manager to be a roadblock, which is why you want to make sure that your peers have appropriate relationships, that they are able to speak with each other on a regular basis. You want to commit to transparency. You want to agree to cascades on certain information. How does it flow? Who gets it first? Who is responsible for informing whom? You need to make sure you've got a robust plan and infrastructure. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure you can pick up the red phone. You want to make sure that you have agreement with your counterpart that no matter what day of the week it is, no matter what time, if there's something urgent, really urgent, that you can reach each other. And you want to make sure you have a communication plan. And this is just a sample, but you want to lay out what your regular ongoing communications are going to be. Who initiates it? Who does it go to? What kind of content does it have? What vehicles do you use and what kind of timing? And stick to this. A lot of times alliances will start out with great designs on having regular ongoing communications to keep people in the know, and then life gets in the way. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing more teams bring somebody on that's responsible for operations, because they handle some of these communications. Partner with your corporate communications group. They can help with some of this in terms of establishing, supporting you on a collaboration site, supporting you in terms of distribution lists, but build a communications and reporting plan for what needs to get communicated on a regular basis. It will help keep people in the know, and it will also make the work of Alliance management visible. And in terms of your infrastructure, there's a lot that you need to have. And we have seen this really proliferate, that it's critically important that the Alliance professionals establish an infrastructure up front. And some of the things it needs to have are messaging, group chat, email integration, shared calendar, action item notifications and management, decision logs, timeline and goal tracking, analytics and reporting, repository, collaborative workspace, and of course, there's a lot in the background that it needs to have in terms of security and version control. But it used to be that we didn't pay a lot of attention to this because everything was back and forth between email. But with remote work, with an increased number of alliances and more complex alliances, it becomes really important that we have a robust infrastructure for the teams to collaborate, to share information, and to serve as the single version of the truth for the alliance. And then you want to make sure that people practice effective communication, right? And you have to be intentional with an alliance because you are crossing boundaries and you are in very different settings, and you're trying to work together on something. So you need to make sure you have common language with shared meaning. And what that means is that you have the same mental picture of interpretations of purpose, agreement terms, what defines a milestone. All of these things can be the source of misalignment if you don't have the same mental picture. And the example that I always use is, let's say, I say to you, hey, let's go out to lunch today. Meet me in the parking lot by the tree. And I'm thinking of the oak tree that's on the south corner, and you're thinking of the pine tree that's on the north corner. We're not going to get together for lunch, even though we both knew we were going to meet by the tree. So common language with shared meaning. And use structured listening to help ensure that, right? It's also called active listening, where you're repeating back and you're making sure there's clarity between you, that you really do understand each other. And that also makes sure that you can understand any sort of emotion around the communication. And you want to set norms and you want to honor them. You want to have regular one-on-ones, regular meetings of cross-functional teams, both internally and with the partner, and make sure you have each other's phone numbers, and just set those boundaries about when it's okay to pick up the phone and call rather than relying on an email, except of course when there's an emergency and it's the red phone. And one of the things that people have been finding lately is that they get a much quicker response if they are communicating using the Teams notes as opposed to email. So the instant messaging, some people use Slack channels, things of that nature, are helping to facilitate communication. So done right, when you focused on operating models, people are empowered to contribute their best, and you've really helped your team members work at building that innovative product, commercializing it to greatest advantage. But when the operating models aren't working effectively, that's when you get burnout and team churn, and everybody is headed to the exit. So we want to make sure that we have models that are striving for no gaps or overlap, that we're leveraging strengths of the partners, we're defining process, building joint process where we need to, that we're understanding what that interface with internal governance should be, and we're building a one-team culture. Because there is a direct relationship between the effectiveness of the operating model and key outcomes. So think about minimizing duplication of work, think about building joint process for routine activities, making sure teams are empowered, that you have robust onboarding and robust communication protocols. And this will help your alliances scale and really enable people to deliver on their best. So we've got about 7 minutes left, and I see we have a bunch of questions in here.
Yeah.
So let's see what we've got. Okay. How do you go about fixing the issue of your partner's internal governance constantly undermining alliance decisions? Oh man, we get that one all the time. That is where you really have to work with your partner to be able to agree on what the order of operations are. If your partner's internal governance is always negating something after the alliance has agreed to it, get that internal input first and try to get what we call a decision envelope. What's the range with which the alliance can come up with its own decisions? Second best is do that, and if you have to get final sign off internally, after the governance committee has made the decision, that might be an interim step. It's not what you want to have because it says that your governance committee members aren't really empowered. But what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you have that order right, and that you also have to share what the impact of having those internal, those governance decisions always overturned or undermined. It is not necessarily an easy thing to accomplish if you have somebody on your partner's side who is very challenging and wants to be involved, but usually you can rectify it with how you order things. So let's see what else we've got here. What techniques do you recommend to ensure that team functional leads are onboarding their new members, especially large global alliances? Yeah, it seems easy to provide and train, but how do you reinforce? Make it something on your scorecard. Keep track of the number of people that have been onboarded, so that you're making it part of the culture and you're holding people accountable for it. How do you balance informing, educating new members without being guilty of information overload? Well, they are going to get a lot of information overload at the beginning of an alliance. But one of the things you can do is make sure you check in with them again. You set up a meeting, give them all the information, follow up with them for questions, follow up with them, or make it a two-part discussion. But you do need them to get up to speed. And if it's an alliance that's been ongoing for a long time, it could indeed be overload. So you mentioned that as part of Alliance information infrastructure, you plan for analytics and reporting. What kind of analytics and reporting do you have in mind for that? It could be a lot of things. It could be reporting on whether or not you're tracking towards your goal. It could be reporting on whether or not decisions have been made timely, how often things have been postponed. I mean, you really have to shape it for the alliance, the nature of the alliance, and ways in which it needs to monitor its activities to be able to really improve its effective operations. But I like to look at things where you've got a mix of leading indicators. What are the things that have to be done in order to get the outcomes that you're looking for? And a lot of times this is basically activity reporting. And then I like to look at time metrics, process-based metrics. Are we doing things efficiently and effectively? How many times does our JSC meeting get postponed, or a decision get postponed, or we, kick the can down the road, right? Because that will give us a measure as to whether or not we're getting our decisions made timely. And lack of timely decision making it almost always points to lost business value. And then you also want to have outcomes measures. So leading indicators, process metrics, and outcome measures. And I think we got time for one fast one. One more: how to influence operating model more effectively when the structure of governance can be detailed in contract by the deal team before there's any experience in working together. Looking at the teams underneath, they're usually not spelled out in the agreement. It's typically just the governance. You can always change governance. You can always do a side letter. You can always look at, how are we going to make this work more effectively? So with that, we are just about at time. I am going to just simply say, please visit our website, the Partnering Insights page, for some of our publications and videos and things of that nature. And Kim, I will
Well,
let
just
you
want to add
close.
something, Jan, that
Quick.
we will be putting a new white paper out on this topic probably within the next 30 days.
Yes. Thank you.
Kim.